Yeah, Gormagus, Cahir. Look, Minister, can I first thank you for being present this evening to take the question. And as you know, it's a question that we've spoken about privately on a number of occasions, and I suppose just to acknowledge that you've always been constructive in those discussions and your deliberations with me, myself, so I'd always appreciate your time. And from the outset, can I just acknowledge that, look, there have been a number of improvements in the whole area of special education over the last few years. We've seen record investment in special education. I think it now accounts for over 20% of the education budget as a whole, accounting for about €2 billion. So that needs to be acknowledged, and also that you have record numbers of SNAs, special education teachers, and I know that we got an extra allocation in last year's budget too, not to mention the attempts to tackle the pupil-teacher ratio. So I must acknowledge all those positive steps before I get to, we'll say, the challenges ahead. I suppose I received a response, it's nearly 9 months old at this stage, from the NCSE, I think it was last March, and it kind of does detail quite comprehensively the issues that we're having in Cork City and County, but primarily suburban Cork. If I just look through the response, and it's in tabular form, at primary school level, it essentially details that all but one primary school, I think in Middleton at the time of these figures, were full in terms of ASD provision. The same is true for villages like Berings, a relatively small village outside the western side of Cork City, Blackrock, which is obviously in the city centre itself, Grenagh, whatever village you want to go, it essentially details the same thing, that the whole issue of special education and the lack of places there is quite stark. The figures we're essentially operating at capacity. When I move to second level, we have a similar picture. We have areas like Glanmire, where I live myself. We have areas like Ballyvalan, the Glen, the entirety of the north side of the city, Churchfield. Again, the majority of them are at capacity at second level. And I suppose the most important figure here is a figure itself, again from the NCSE, in that 193 primary schools will have ASD provision for students, and only 70 are available at post-primary. And now these figures might have changed since then, and I know there was an extra allocation last year, but it paints a stark picture that, you know, when kids depart from primary school and transition to second level, you know, there's nearly a 3-to-1 ratio there of ASD provision from primary versus secondary. So an awful lot of parents and an awful lot of children honestly do feel that they're falling off the edge of a cliff in terms of service provision when they make that transition. So look, the picture is quite stark in the figures that I have available to me, and I would just ask, you know, where do we go from here in terms of service provision for Cork? And I am aware that, you know, at present you do have powers available to you under Section 37A, and I think those powers have only been utilised sparingly, and primarily in Dublin, I think, since that legislation came in. And I would ask that you seriously consider at this stage in parts of the city where I represent, particularly Glanmire, as I said, in the northern side of the city out to Blarney, where it's fairly obvious where certain schools are not pulling their weight, that such consideration should also be given to enacting those powers. Saving that, I would encourage, or possibly, you know, I would encourage you to perhaps legislate that the NCSE itself could make, you know, direct interventions where schools are failing to meet that need as well. And just before my time finishes, I will just highlight one area in particular that is a real bone of contention, and it's not an area that I represent, but in Ballincollig there's a considerable deficit in terms of ASD provision, and you have children travelling from that area where there's a population of over 25,000, I believe, and they're travelling to outside villages like the likes I've mentioned earlier, Dripsey and so on, and Farran, to get the kind of ASD provision that their students need. And I think that's, you know, a damning indictment of the system as it's currently set up. And I do believe that we need to consider changing that, where the discretion is taken away from schools, and whether we empower yourself or the NCSE to make those interventions directly.
I would like to thank the Deputy for raising this issue, as it gives me an opportunity to outline the current position regarding provision for children with special education needs, including autism. And in fairness, Deputy, I do want to acknowledge your ongoing engagement with me and your very clear and very specific interest in this area of education, and I want to thank you for that. Enabling children with special educational needs to receive an education appropriate to their needs is a priority for this government. This year, the Department of Education will invest in excess of €2 billion, or over 25% of the department's budget in the area of special education needs support. As a result, the numbers of special education teachers, special needs assistants and special class and school places are at unprecedented levels in this country. Since 2011, the number of special classes in mainstream schools has increased by almost 386%, from 548 to 2,118 for the 2021-2022 school year. Of these, 1,854 special classes cater for students with autism. Throughout 2020 and 2021, the Department of Education and the National Council for Special Education, the NCSE, have worked closely on a more streamlined and joined-up planning process, which has ensured a targeted approach to meet demand for special needs placements ahead of each new school year, and this approach is delivering. This intensive intervention has seen an additional 269 special classes, providing over 1,600 new places already opened nationwide for the 21-22 school year. Notwithstanding the extent of this investment, there are some parts of the country where increases in population and other issues have led to concerns regarding a shortage of school places. The NCSE has responsibility for coordinating and advising on the education provision for children nationwide. It has well-established structures in place for engaging with schools and parents. NCSE seeks to ensure that schools in an area can, between them, cater for all children who have been identified as needing special class placements. Normally, special class and special school places are established with the full cooperation of the schools in areas where they are required. However, there are some parts of the country where the NCSE has faced challenges in getting schools and their patrons to voluntarily agree to provide special class or special school places. I know this can cause much anguish for the parents and families involved. There is currently a network of 357 special classes in Cork, of which 309 are special classes for children with autism. Of the 309 special classes for children with autism, 228 are at primary level, including 21 early intervention classes and 81 at post-primary level. A total of 45 new special classes were established for the 2021-2022 school year. The NCSE, through their network of CNO special education needs organisers, are currently engaging in a process of establishing new classes for the 2022-23 school year and beyond. NCSE is looking at local information in relation to projected demand for future special education places, particularly to cater for students with autism who have associated complex needs. Budget 22 has provided for the creation of 287 additional special classes for the 22-23 school year. These additional classes will provide over 1,700 new places this year. This additional provision will bring the total number of special classes to over 2,400 in the 22-23 school year. The provision of special school places in Cork was also significantly increased for the 21-22 school year with the opening of a new special school in Carrigaline. The number of places available in this school will again increase for September 22, and work is also progressing on the expansion of an existing special school in Oireachtas. Overall, Budget 22 has provided for an additional 23 teaching posts and 46 SNA posts in special schools nationwide, which will create an additional 140 special school places in 2022.
Thank you, Minister. Doctor, 2 further minutes.
Yep, Ara. And look, Minister, the response does give me an update on the figures, but it does point out, a concerning ratio in terms of the provision of ASD places from primary versus secondary. So in Cork now we're at 228 at primary level and 81 at post-primary level. So there's still that 3-to-1 ratio almost of ASD provision at primary versus secondary, and that's particularly in Cork where the pinch point is. It's when kids are transitioning from primary to second level, that's where parents are finding it extremely difficult to get access to ASD places, ASD classes. Can I just secondly say, in regards to the responsibility of the NCSE for coordinating and advising on education provision, as you've said, it's quite clear that in suburban Cork, as I've said, every unit is full. And look, it might be anecdotal evidence, but it's quite clear to any TD here from Cork that are approached by parents. You have parents driving or sending their kids on minibuses, often for 30, 40 minutes, up to an hour. So kids aren't getting that provision in their own locality, as should be their right. Look, without naming schools, I can give examples of large towns where there's 3 secondary schools and only 1 school is providing ASD classes. The other, in one case, the other 2 schools have never bothered, and whether that's an issue over snobbery, not wanting to run an ASD class, or whatever the case may be, that is the facts. And I think so long as we allow that discretion with secondary schools and boards of management, that is going to remain, that difficulty is going to remain. So I would ask again that you would give further consideration, not only to your own powers under Section 37A, but I would ask that you maybe strengthen the role of the NCSE, get them to directly intervene. Even the demography in Cork, the population growth is quite apparent. If you're in the city centre, east to Youghal, there's not 1 ASD place at the moment. I think there was 1 last year, but those figures are outdated now, in St Aidan's in Ballyvalan, and that was the only place between city centre east as far as Youghal. That's nearly 40 kilometres. So that's the stark picture that we have. So I do think it requires urgent action. I'd just like to acknowledge that the good progress that is being made on a new special education site in Glanmire, and I know that it's a sensitive commercial stage, but again, there is progress in that issue, and that's giving us hope as well. Gormagat.
Thank you, Deputy. On Tara.
Again, I would like to thank the Deputy for raising this issue, and indeed for giving me the opportunity to reassure the House that the Department of Education is committed to ensuring that all children can access an education suitable to their needs. Planning is actively underway to ensure that children without a placement for next year are provided with a suitable placement. The NCSE is leading work in this regard, and I do want to reassure the Deputy that the Department will continue to support the NCSE and schools through the provision of necessary funding and capital investment to ensure that all children are successful in accessing an education. Considerable work is undertaken with schools on the ground, and this has proven successful, notwithstanding the issues that the Deputy has raised and the need to continue to engage with schools in this respect. But I again want to emphasise that there is a huge commitment from the point of view of the Department of Education to accelerate provision of school places and special schools. Considerable progress has been made in this very short time span since the formation of this government. It is a significant recognition that almost 25% of the budget now, rightly so, is being expended on special education, and beyond that, the specific interventions. For example, Budget 21 provided an additional 990 special needs assistants, and this has resulted in over 18,000 SNAs being allocated to schools by December, the end of December in 2021. And then Budget 2022 provides funding for an additional 1,165 SNAs to provide support to children with special education needs, which will bring the total number of SNAs in this country to more than 19,169 at the end of December 2022. Provision for 19,169 SNAs as I say, at the end of the year, will represent an increase of 81% since 2011, at which time 10,575 SNAs were provided for. The budget has also provided in 21 for an additional 145 special education teachers, bringing the provision to 13,765 in the country. And Budget 22 provides for the creation of an additional 980 new teaching posts in special education. This new investment is required to meet the needs of students with special education needs. The point being that there is an ongoing commitment to address the issues that arise in terms of staffing and supports for students and the provision of places for students with additional needs.
Thank you, Minister.